Barney Cousins retreated to his country cottage to conduct an experiment and carefully refine the details of his plan. With a stopwatch in hand, he soaked a cloth in a special solution and took a few deep breaths. When he regained consciousness, Barney was pleased with the results. The solution would render a person unconscious for approximately 37 minutes, giving him ample time to safely transport them to his home. Afterward, Barney began rehearsing how he would persuade the girl to get into his car. Although things didn't go perfectly at first, he persisted. The rehearsed scenario ensured that the stranger would end up in his vehicle, leaving her with no escape. Barney greeted his daughter Denise with a smile at the bus stop. She began to suspect that her father might have a new love interest since he had been spending so much time at his country house. Even while talking with his daughter, Barney continued to ponder the finer points of his plan. When he suggested they play a game called Captured, Denise didn't find it amusing. Once home with his daughter, Barney got to work on some repairs, with Denise helping out. During the process, he came across a spider, which immediately sparked an idea in his mind. Later that evening, Barney continued his psychological games by offering Denise a snack. She was horrified to find it covered in spiders. Denise screamed, but Barney was satisfied it was all part of his plan. The next day, Barney casually asked a neighbor if they had heard any screams the previous night, to which the neighbor replied that they hadn't noticed anything. Barney had come to this quiet town to test his schemes in practice. Approaching a passing girl, he asked for directions to the post office and offered her a ride. However, she declined without hesitation. Barney realized his pulse was racing. He needed to be calmer and more confident. It wasn't until his sixth attempt that he managed to lower his heart rate from 180 to 95 beats per minute. Meanwhile, his wife, Helen, also suspected that Barney might be having an affair. He assured her that all his time was spent on repairs at the country house. Yet, as Barney mused aloud, he began to wonder if it was time to stop and abandon this dangerous plan. But he also understood that with each step, he was getting closer to a point of no return. Meanwhile, Jeff and Diane, a young couple traveling across America, find themselves in a difficult situation. They're stranded in a remote area with no one around. When their car broke down in a tunnel due to running out of gas, Diane reminded Jeff that they should have refueled earlier. Frustrated by the situation, Jeff got out of the car to find gasoline, leaving Diane behind. She searched for a flashlight, but couldn't catch up to him in time. When Jeff returned to the car, he discovered that Diane was no longer there. Distraught, she had retreated nearby and sat crying in the car. To avoid raising any suspicion among the girls, Barney decided to pretend that he had a broken arm. This also allowed him to discreetly hide a small vial of chloroform in the cast. Diane made Jeff promise that he would never leave her alone again. As a symbol of this promise, she gave him a lighter engraved with the words "Forever, Diane." Deciding that she would drive from that point on, she headed to the restroom. It was at that moment that Barney spotted her. Quite a bit of time had passed, and Diane still hadn't returned. She wasn't in the store or the restroom. Jeff began to panic, running around the area with her photo and shouting her name. One of the cashiers remembered seeing her about half an hour earlier. That evening, a police officer informed Jeff that they could only file a report 24 hours after her disappearance. Disheartened, Jeff returned to the car and broke down in tears. Barney noticed a flyer with Diane's photo, stating that she had been missing for 3 years. It turned out that Jeff had been posting new flyers every month and had even recently spoken on the radio to draw attention to her disappearance. Exhausted and depressed, Jeff walked into a diner one night. A waitress named Rita recognized him from school and offered to serve him. During their conversation, he told her about Diane, who had gone missing 60 miles from there, and showed her a picture. When Jeff accidentally knocked over a glass of milk, Rita insisted that he shouldn't drive and should stay the night at a motel. In the end, she arranged for him to sleep in a garage, and she stayed there as well. The next day, Jeff confided that he had recently lost his job but was now working on writing a novel. Rita insisted that Jeff take her phone number. Some time passed, and Rita and Jeff began living together. He no longer wanted to talk about Diane to avoid reopening old wounds. One evening, Rita found a gun that Jeff had bought for self-defense and asked him to get rid of it. Jeff received a call from a publisher who scheduled a meeting with him. Unfortunately, his novel wasn't suitable for publication, but the publisher suggested he write a book about what happened to him several years ago. Jeff agreed, deciding not to tell Rita about it. The memories that resurfaced reignited his determination to resume the search for Diane. He was invited to appear on a television show, which Barney and his daughter watched. The host suggested that Jeff speak directly to Diane's kidnapper. Jeff said that he wanted to meet the person, but only to find out what really happened. He also promised the kidnapper safety. Meanwhile, Barney was working as a university professor. Rita started to take an interest in what her boyfriend was really writing about. The document on his computer was password protected, and Rita decided to try all possible combinations using her name. Then she tried using the name of Jeff's former girlfriend, combining the letters to form the word missing. It turned out to be the correct password. Among the documents, Rita found a letter to Diane in which Jeff wrote that he couldn't forget her and wouldn't stop until he found her. Feeling hurt, Rita became furious. She found Jeff and appeared before him dressed in clothes similar to those Diane used to wear, even donning a dark wig. She told Jeff that if he needed Diane so much, he could call her by that name, but after this, she would disappear forever without a trace. Jeff's room was covered with maps and newspaper clippings that he had collected over time. He was faced with a choice of whom he truly loved. Rita told him that she had figured out the password to his computer and had seen the book he was working on. Jeff confessed that the uncertainty tormented him, that it was important for him to understand every detail of what happened, even if Diane was no longer alive. Rita decided to help him with this. Together, they went to the gas station where it all began. Jeff, who had never mustered the courage to return, had only sent out flyers, hoping for a miracle. Looking around, Rita told him that Diane wasn't there, and perhaps he would never know what happened to her. She gave Jeff one last chance. Either he lets go of the past and stays with her, or she would leave forever. Without hesitation, Jeff rushed to Rita and hugged her tightly. That same day, he burned all the newspaper clippings and flyers related to the search for Diane. However, Barney was unhappy that he hadn't seen that familiar face in a while. He quickly wrote a letter and slipped it to Jeff, suggesting they meet. After receiving the letter, Jeff showed it to Rita, telling her that someone was watching him. At first, Rita thought it was just some prankster, but then she insisted that Jeff go to the police. Jeff, however, was determined to find the person on his own. Rita realized that Jeff hadn't changed and was still obsessed with the past, so she decided to end their relationship. She returned to their apartment to pack her things, but Barney soon arrived there as well. He followed Rita inside, holding a bottle with a rag. Barney was about to attack when Rita began recording a message on the answering machine, stating that she intended to disappear from Jeff's life forever. Hearing this, Barney decided to leave on his own. When Jeff got the message and returned home, he discovered that Rita had left. Shortly after, Barney came by, holding the keys he had previously taken from Diane. Although Jeff had promised to resolve things peacefully, he attacked Barney, throwing punches. Barney only smirked in response. He told Jeff that if he decided to kill him, he would never learn the truth. Barney then suggested they take a drive together, and after a moment of hesitation, Jeff agreed, hoping it would lead him to Diane. Meanwhile, under the influence of alcohol, Rita decided to listen to her message on the answering machine again, but Jeff had recorded over the greeting, and Barney's voice was captured on the tape. Rita realized that Jeff was in danger. Staying calm, Barney offered Jeff some food, assuring him that he hadn't harmed Diane. He then shared a story from his past. One day, during a family outing, they saw a little girl begin to drown. Without thinking, he jumped into the water and saved her. At that moment, he became a hero in his daughter's eyes. However, later Barney wondered if he could harm someone as easily as he could do good. At the same time, Rita called the police, but an officer informed her that they could only start searching for Jeff after 24 hours. Meanwhile, Jeff and Barney were stopped by a police officer who asked Barney to fasten his seatbelt. Barney initially refused, citing his claustrophobia, which he even had a doctor's note for. Deciding to take matters into her own hands, Rita went to a strange neighbor who had witnessed the fight. However, the neighbor was in a delusional state and got distracted by a small green elf. Despite this, she somehow managed to remember the car's license plate number. At the police station, Rita lied, claiming that her car had been stolen and provided Barney's license plate number. This led her to learn his last name and address. Meanwhile, Barney was recounting to Jeff how his attempts to lure victims had repeatedly failed. However, one day, on his birthday, he was given a bracelet and a photo album dedicated to his father. In one of the photos, Barney had a broken arm, and that's when he realized that to achieve his goals, he needed to appear weaker, not stronger. By wearing a cast, he was easily able to lure a woman into his car by asking for her help. However, when he accidentally sneezed and wiped his nose with a handkerchief, he nearly collapsed from dizziness. That day, Barney decided to abandon his plan and, laughing, threw away the cast. But then Diane approached Barney herself, asking him to exchange money. At the coffee machine wouldn't accept. She noticed the bracelet on Barney's wrist and thought about getting a similar one for her friend, Jeff. Seizing the opportunity, Barney lied, saying he was selling the bracelets for just $2, and invited Diane to his car. She followed him, holding a handkerchief soaked in a sedative. Barney suggested Diane get into the car to help him. Though Diane was initially cautious, she relaxed when she saw a family photo in the car. At that moment, Barney attacked her and knocked her out. Years later, Barney returned to that same gas station with Jeff. The reason Barney agreed to meet with Jeff was because of Jeff's persistence and unwavering determination. Barney saw Jeff as a worthy adversary. Meanwhile, Rita had made her way to Barney's house, where she was met by Denise, Barney's daughter. Mistakenly, Denise assumed Rita was her father's lover and even agreed to show her the way to the cabin in the woods. Barney continued his twisted game with Jeff. If Jeff wanted to know what happened to Diane, he would have to follow her path and drink the coffee laced with drugs. Barney hinted that there was a chance Diane might still be alive, but Jeff would have to drink the coffee to find out. Barney didn't even need a gun. His main weapon was Jeff's obsession with finding Diane. In essence, Jeff had no choice. When Jeff finally decides to drink the offered coffee, he loses consciousness and wakes up buried alive in a coffin, just as Barney had foretold. Now, Jeff is forced to endure the same agonizing ordeal that Diane went through, with no way to change the outcome. Meanwhile, after dropping the child off at the park, Rita headed toward Barney's cabin. Stopping nearby, she grabbed the suitcase where the gun was supposed to be, only to discover that Jeff, as she had asked him earlier, had gotten rid of the weapon. Anticipating her move, Barney attacked her from behind, but Rita managed to hit him over the head with the suitcase. She hid in the woods and, waiting for the right moment, struck Barney with a plank. Barney tried to deceive her, claiming that if she spared his life, he would tell her where Jeff was. But Rita didn't believe him and struck him in the face with the plank again. On her way to the house, Rita stumbled over Jeff's grave but soon got up and kept moving forward. Armed with a knife, she called the police but suddenly smelled chloroform from the phone receiver and began to lose consciousness. At that moment, Barney returned to the house. Gathering her strength once more, Rita struck him, injuring his arm, but her attempt to drive away failed as the car got stuck in the mud. Barney attacked her again, trying to sedate her, but Rita burned his hand with a cigarette lighter, setting the cloth on fire. Weakened, she still couldn't escape. Barney sat her down in a chair and claimed that everything that happened to Jeff was his own choice. He then offered Rita a cup of coffee to avoid complicating things further. Looking around, Rita realized that Jeff was in that grave. She decided to trick Barney, claiming that she had his daughter as a hostage and was willing to trade her for Jeff. At first, Barney didn't believe her, but when Rita mentioned personal details she had learned from the girl, he was convinced. Barney removed the cloth from the phone receiver and called home, where his worried wife told him that their daughter was indeed missing. Realizing he had no other choice, Barney agreed to drink the coffee to learn his daughter's whereabouts and drain the cup. Afterward, Rita hurried to dig up Jeff. He was unconscious in the coffin, but Barney, who had sneaked up behind Rita with a sod, revealed that the sedative would take 15 minutes to kick in. Rita's scream woke Jeff, and with his last bit of strength, Jeff noticed another grave, the one where Diane had suffered 3 years ago. Later, at a meeting with the publisher, Jeff declared that he wouldn't be writing a book about his experience, and he and Rita no longer drink coffee. And that's where the movie ends. Thank you for watching until the end.